Well, let's get into it, Seth. So good to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
You bet. So I would imagine your line of work, 6 years ago, this pandemic was such a shapeshifter, such a big moment for humanity. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you live and do things today?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Wow, 6 years ago. It's hard to believe, isn't it?
I
Over
know
half a
it's wild.
Yeah, COVID was wild. And I think COVID was what brought me actually to hospice chaplaincy, which I did for a while then. And I think it brought us all face to face with death a little bit more than we're comfortable with. And you know what? It seems like we didn't react very well as a society. There was a lot of shutdowns based on fear, right? And then there was a lot of reaction based on, well, we can talk about what it was based on, but
Yeah,
reaction like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. You can't tell me to do this, you can't tell me to do that. And some of that too is, I think, based on people not wanting to face their own mortality. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of death going around, and people just couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle it. We were in shock. We thought we were past this. We're here in the US. We're gonna be fine. We have the best healthcare system in the world. Well, thousands died,
yeah.
across the world. Millions died. And we just didn't really allow ourselves to sit with that because it was just too much. It was too overwhelming. So for me personally, 2020, I had a baby girl and a toddler son, and we were forced to stay home. And so I was going crazy inside of a house with the three people I love the most, my wife and two kids, and it was still just so hard. Luckily I live in Southern California, so I was able to go out for jogs and walks
Yeah.
and connect with nature. But it was tough. And then about a year into the pandemic, I had the opportunity to take some of my ministry training, and I'm an ordained Baptist pastor, take that to hospice chaplaincy and to sit with the dying, not just people who are Christian like me, people from all faiths and their families too. And so I really was able to see in that kind of mid-COVID moment what it was to look death in the eyes. And some people did a really good job of that, and they were ready to die, and some people weren't. And you could tell the family members who were ready to let go too,
Yeah.
but others weren't. And so that for me was something that really just kind of moved me to think more about what it means for us who are not facing death's door quite so quickly, to befriend our death and to use it as like a clarifying tool. Because a lot of those people on their deathbed, they had regrets. A
Yeah.
lot of people hadn't faced other transitions well, so they couldn't face the biggest transition of all very well.
I've had a very special relationship with hospice. One of my first jobs out of college was with a home health and hospice consulting firm. And I
Yeah.
remember the woman that ran the consulting part of hospice was a wonderful human being. An ex hippie, had so many wonderful stories, and I just wasn't really familiar with that world. One other thing that affected me during that time with hospice was coming from jazz radio, having a jazz radio show. I get all these CDs. It's still all CD oriented.
Yeah.
So I found a local hospice. I think it was KC Hospice, and I donated all my discs to them.
Mm.
And I would take it in, and it was such a great thing because they loved it, and they had a huge catalog of music. But I found out about 6 months after that, my wife, a teacher of hers, she's a teacher, and her teacher in high school, her home ec teacher, her husband was passing, and she's a wonderful woman. And I talked to her. I talked to her quite a bit. And she pulled me aside one time, and she said, my husband listened to those jazz CDs as he was getting ready to leave this reality, and it just
Wow.
completely blew my mind.
Yeah.
Those things. I wish I could still do it because because I probably can now, but at that time they wouldn't take anything because it was so
Sure.
high risk in there, and it
Yeah.
was a physical thing. But anyway, so let me ask you this: if you were to be put in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day right now,
Yep.
and you had to explain what you do on a daily basis to one of those kids, how would you explain your job?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a leadership coach and a leadership trainer. And so what I would tell them is that I help leaders think through what they really care about, and then two, I help them when there's big changes happening. So if there's big changes happening in terms of the leader's life, in terms of the leader's company or organization, I help them figure out how best to get through with courage, how to get through in a way that helps themselves and helps others, helps them achieve their outcome. So, if those 12-year-olds are kind of sitting there thinking, that's what I'm helping them do. I'm helping these leaders get through change with a clear understanding of who they are and what they're supposed to be doing.
So when you were a kid, what was your dream gig? What did you want to be when you grew up?
It's interesting. So when I was real little, I wanted to be a firefighter,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And I think that yeah, that shows like I want to help people. In a sense, I wanted to save people, right? Save them out of the fiery buildings, things like that. That didn't end up happening. But helping people, saving people, all that stuff, that did end up happening, right? Because eventually I went into ministry, right? And I'm still definitely got my foot in ministry as well, on Sundays especially. But now I'm thinking about what does it mean to take that desire to help people into more of a kind of corporate or nonprofit setting where leaders, they need someone to come alongside them. It's lonely at the top, and I've been at the top and I've been at the bottom. I've been at the border, literally. I've been all over, and having someone who can sit with you in those dark times, or in those overwhelming times, or in those exciting times, that's pretty great. And so that little Seth, wanted to be a firefighter. I guess I'm not saving people out of those burning buildings, but sometimes people do feel like things are crumbling down around them, and
Yeah.
I can help them with that.
So you got a very special level of skills and occupational visions that are going on here. What happened early on in your life? You said you were where were you born and raised?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Minnesota, the
Okay.
suburbs of Minneapolis, and grew up in a very traditional home. Mom, dad, sister. My other sister she went to college the week I was born, so I didn't see her as much. But just kind of a strong Christian upbringing. A lot of good old, uh, just family values, all that stuff, right? And so I grew up with that, and um, then little by little got exposed more to like other ways of being in the world, other cultures, other ideas, other systems, and values and things like that, and just started to try at least to integrate more and more of the things that I saw that were valuable, and slowly but surely set aside some of the things that, at least for me, didn't seem as helpful. And so now I still have that core that my parents gave me, and I'm so grateful for, but also just a more expansive view of like what is helpful in this world, right? So I talk sometimes about befriending your death, which sounds weird, right? But it comes from different traditions, including my own, the Christian tradition, but others as well. What does it mean to befriend your death? Like the worst thing in the world, right? Death. um, and everyone's friendships are different. I can't tell you how to be friends with people you knew from high school. I can't tell you how to be friends with people in your neighborhood, right? But we all have these different relationships, and the fundamental one, if we believe in a higher power, is that. And then maybe the second most important one is like our future. How do we befriend our future, including the hard stuff? And so I'm there to kind of help people think about that, and to feel it too, because there's a lot of feelings. And so yeah, just kind of growing up and being propelled into just a very different life than what I expected, as a little tyke, growing up in suburban Minneapolis.
So it's interesting when I think about our modern slice of history. I joked around during the whole COVID thing that the time before BC is before COVID,
Yeah,
and now we're in the AD after COVID, AC. But I think it's interesting that Minneapolis has become a lightning rod for all of
sure.
right? I mean, between George Floyd and what happened with Rachel Good, and she was actually had time here in Kansas City. She lived in a suburb pretty close to
Yeah.
here for a
Yeah.
while. And I find it interesting that, especially thinking about it biblically and spiritually, like how Minneapolis has become this place. Like when we think about this time period,
Hmm.
inevitably that city's going to be a part of what's going on, and it's unfolding right now before our eyes. We don't know where this is going to go. Do you
Yeah.
find that interesting coming from there?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. One thing about Minneapolis is it's always been a place where there's lots of art and there's lots of expression. You know, there I don't know if it's still true. I think it is though, but there are more theaters per capita in Minneapolis than anywhere else in the US other than
Wow.
maybe New York City, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So lots of arts, lots of expression, lots of people living a different way than what's usual, and by the time you got to the outer ring suburbs where I was, there was less of that.
Yeah.
But when you went into the city, you could see that for sure. But then also, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and so it was the murder-apolis, right? So there were these different layers of the city where there was a lot of art, a lot of expression, but also a lot of violence, a lot of crime. And then of course you have state power and state use of force and violence, and all those kind of swirling around can make it just a really kind of hotbed of what we're seeing right now. What happened with George Floyd, the tragedy there, what happened more recently and is happening now with ICE on the streets. And for me too, it's interesting because I came from Minneapolis, which is not right on the border with Canada, but we would go up there, and it's a very different border than where I live now in San Diego. And for about 8 years, I actually worked doing ministry at this border, right? So we didn't see ICE as much, but I saw Border Patrol every Sunday when I would serve communion at the border with families who are separated, with migrants who are kind of being detained. They wouldn't call it that. The government wouldn't call that, but they were being detained between the two walls. I'm pretty intimately aware with, how these different social factors, these different governmental factors kind of all come together in this way that can make for a lot of hardship and a lot of pain and a lot of ferment and all of this stuff that we're seeing in the news every day, and is honestly just really sad and tragic.
So let me ask you this: who's been your inspirational force in your life to navigate you to this point, to find your footing, to find your place?
Yeah, so I think in terms of thinkers, one of the one that helped me the most is his name's Henry Nouwen, and he's dead now. He died in the 1990s, but he was a priest. He's a Catholic priest out of Europe, and then he worked in Notre Dame and Yale and Harvard and all of these places where he taught and taught the brightest minds on earth. But at the same time, he was always reckoning with himself. He was a psychologist, not even really a theologian, although he combined the two. And what he did is he talked about what it meant to be a wounded healer. He talked about what it meant to befriend your death. He talked about what it meant to have integration, and more than that, he tried to live it out. Right? He one time he left to go to Latin America to try to be in solidarity with those impoverished there, but he couldn't hack it. He's too much like me, maybe too soft. He needed something a little bit nicer in terms of quality of life. And so he moved back with the blessing of the people who were down there. They said, "You just can't do that here. It's okay. You're gonna be fine." But what he ended up doing in his later years is he sat with and he was in community with people who are mentally handicapped, right? So he left like these halls of wisdom and prestige, and he that's how he ended his life, was helping people, and one in particular who was severely mentally handicapped. And every day he would help him bathe, he would help him get ready, he would help him eat, and like that's how he served, how he lived out his vocation, his calling. And so it's a guy like that
Yeah.
who really inspires me to help. Always he was always writing, he was speaking at huge churches and big events, and at the same time his daily life was one of service.
So how do you view work-life balance? How does that work for you? Does that exist?
It exists. I think, having family is something that really helps me pull out of just work, 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 right? And family's its own kind of work, right? But these kids who were, babies when COVID started, back to our initial conversation, uh, they're in grade school right now. I just dropped them off. It's a little earlier here on the West Coast, and I dropped them off and came and sat down talking to you now. But that helps me have this rhythm of life, pulls me away. Last week, grateful that I was able to go on a cruise with them and my in-laws and my wife, and so just taking those times out. So for me, I'm someone I actually have ADHD, and so I'm kind of doing all things at all times and nothing at the same time. It feels like, but always making some progress. But what works well for me is deep dives into whatever it is, work. I'm writing a book right now. It's called Lead Like You Will Die, right? So I took a few days here, a few days there to just write. And then also just take a few days like I did last week to just really have FaceTime with the family. Not FaceTime on the phone, but FaceTime like face to face,
Yeah.
and then I just scheduled a spiritual retreat for a few months from now, right? So just a deep dive. So whatever I'm doing, it's kind of a deep dive into this or deep dive into that. And so every day is different. Not every day feels like it has balance, but I think on the whole, for me and the way that I'm wired, it works out pretty well so that I have a little balance here, a little balance there.
So when that big, huge word and like bright letters comes up that says retirement, what do you think about? What goes through your mind?
Yeah, well, first thing that goes through my mind is my academic research. So I have a doctor of ministry, which is, a professional degree and it's in culture and religion. And so I think about that stuff all the time. But right now I'm in a PhD in leadership studies at the University of San Diego, and I'm actually studying retirement for my dissertation. Not quite there yet, but getting ready for that. And so when you talk about retirement, I think about that. I think about meaning making. I think about studying that. I think about, how am I going to have my methodology, all that stuff, right? But at its core is in this second to last transition in life, right? The last one being death, the second to last one being retirement. How do people make meaning? How do people find out who they are now that they don't have their big role? Now that, maybe they were a manager, maybe they were a CEO, whatever they were in the past, that's gone, you know? So what are they now without that? Who are they now? And so I'm studying those things. So I'm thinking about that in terms of retirement. In terms of my own retirement, right? So I've kind of three things going on vocationally, right? One is the ministry thing, one is the academic thing, and one is the coaching and leadership work thing. And right, those first two, those are the people who retire the latest statistically, right? If you're clergy, you retire not usually in your 60s, usually in your 70s or even beyond. And then if you're in academia, especially as a professor, same thing. You retire really late. And so retirement is not something that people in my line of work think about too much.
Yeah.
But I'm also someone who wonders, about my own meaning, about my own identity outside of work, outside of helping people. Right? I'm a helper. What do I do outside of that? And so it's something that I wonder, I just turned 40 last year. So I got maybe a couple decades left in me, hopefully. But it's out there, it's out there. But at the same time, it's calling to me this life that maybe is a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more textured with meaning that's not change the world, but is, the subtleties of me and my significant other, my wife, right? Me and those other people who are significant in my life, my kids, and maybe by then grandkids, who knows, my neighbors, my good friends. So retirement, I mean, as I think about it right now, is more of an academic pursuit, but it's also on my mind too, in terms of I'm out here preaching this idea of befriending your future, befriending your death. Well, can I do that too in terms of this death of Seth as a producer, as a helper? And it's something I got to sit with, and think about in my own vocation, my own calling.
So, growing up, I remember, being a Gen Xer from the 80s, my idea of leadership was the president getting up and giving a speech and doing it eloquently. And it was Reagan. No matter where you are politically on the paradigm, he could speak well. He did it really
Oh
well.
yeah, great communicator.
And I think about the breakdown in our modern world of things. Things are getting quite weird and clowny in very specific ways.
Yep.
So my question to you is this: what has been your template for leadership that you kind of subconsciously or consciously have held on to that's become the backbone of your methodology that you try to teach or that you try to get into?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I'm, in the theoretical world of leadership all the time with my studies, and there's a lot more about leadership not as a person out front, leadership not as kind of this big man, like Reagan would have been. And I think that's all well and good, right? Because leadership is more than just a person. It's the movement, this reciprocal movement between people, to get to a common goal, all that stuff, right? But at the same time, most of us, we kind of like having a figurehead. We kind of like having someone to look to. So for me, I think it maybe isn't Reagan because I was a little bit young when he went out of office, but it's probably someone more like what we saw in Steve Jobs. That's the person that my generation goes toward, whether or not we want to, right? But he was the one who, when we looked at the world, in the 90s, early 2000s, he was the one doing all the change, and even before that, right? With the first Apple computers. He was the one who was showing a way ahead, whether it was with the iPod. I'm the iPod generation, right? The music in your ear, you have the Neon Jazz podcast, right? We didn't just have to have phonographs anymore, right? We could have it in our pocket, in our ears. I remember those silhouettes dancing all over the TV, right? That was the person who could evoke a future. Now, now that I've studied it more, there's certainly problems with that, right? It's not just this one person, it's this whole group of people. But of course, we still, as humans, we want that figurehead. We want someone to look at and say, he's the guy or she's the person that I can follow, you know, um, whether it's in my job or in culture or whatever it is. And we see that again and again, whether or not leadership movements happen because of one solitary leader. We as humans, we want there to be that one leader that gives us comfort, that gives us some sort of certainty, about what it is that's coming next.
So, of everything that you've done and accomplished and evolved to in your life, what are you the proudest of?
I mean, it's
Pride can
probably
be
got to be,
ugly, yeah, but happiest
yeah.
about. I'm sorry.
Sure, sure. It's my kids, at the end of the day. For me, like, I've done a lot in the world. I have a lot of degrees that I could have in the world, but I don't. There's a lot of things that I've done in terms of ministry, in terms of work, in terms of all these accomplishments. And, I'm grateful that I've had a life where I can do all that stuff. But like for me at the end of the day, it's the fact that I have kids that are, so far, they're good human beings, they're on track to doing good things in the world and hopefully to be happy. I think for me, in terms of my own value system, that's what counts. Like I've done a lot of great things in the world, and I'm proud of those too. But it's those things that hit closest to home. And honestly, it's the kids and the fact that they're here in the world that has made me think more about my own vocation, my own work, because I want to work not just to do good in the world. For a long time, I was doing that in a way that was, it made me and my wife a little bit poor, because I was just doing ministry and these kinds of things that, a lot of good out there, but not bringing back income, that helped my family. But now that I have kids, I gotta look out for them too. Because
Yeah.
my wife grew up poor and I grew up, lower middle class, and so we were fine getting by, especially here in California where things expensive. But now it's working with high impact leaders who also have money that can be put in my pockets too, not just so that I can go, flit it away, but so that I can invest in the future of my kids. So yeah, it's my kids. They've changed my perspective, and they've made me proud in ways that I didn't even know were
Yes,
possible.
absolutely. So at the end of the day, Seth, everyone has a perception of you: family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that you affect, everyone that affects you, that you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah. Oh, what a good question. Yeah. Who do I think I am? I think excuse me, I'm somebody who, at the end of the day, I want to help others, and I want to help others in a way that's authentic to me, right? So that's someone who is caring, but also isn't gonna let someone walk all over me. That's I'm somebody who wants you to, as I'm helping you, come to terms with some of those dark things that are there, not just so that you can be nihilistic or something, but so that you can move ahead with clarity, so that you can get through whatever that change is that's happening that's so hard, in a way that helps you and helps the people you're impacting as well. So I think that's who I am. So that's a person who's full of joy and silliness on the one hand, but also full of some pretty deep and at times pensive moments as well. And so just accepting the whole of human existence for me, and hopefully for you too, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between.
So if anybody wants to reach out, they want to learn more, dive into your world, where do they go? Where's the best place?
Yeah, so I have a website. Unfortunately, it's under construction right now, but it's lifedeathandleadership.com. You can find me there. And then, of course, like anyone else right now, I'm on LinkedIn, Seth David Clark on LinkedIn. You can find me there.
Okay. Excellent. Seth, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your story. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great.